Welcome to Free Media. I'm Amber Duke.
And I'm Robby Soave. Well, RFK Jr. had quite a week. The health secretary fired the head of the CDC after just a few weeks on the job, announced several new initiatives relating to nutrition and medicine, and is also vowing to get to the bottom of autism, a condition he has long attributed to vaccination, contrary to the expert consensus. Let's watch.
Robby, autism, if I could, I don't want to go too long because we have a lot of people, but the autism is such a tremendous horror show, what's happening in our country and some other countries, but mostly our country. How are you doing on that?
We are doing very well. We will have announcements as promised in September. We're finding certain interventions now that are clearly, almost certainly causing autism. And we're going to be able to address those in September.
It's such a big day. I'm looking forward to that day because there's something wrong when you see the kind of numbers that you have today versus 20 years ago. And those numbers, what are those numbers, Bob?
In 1970, the biggest epidemiological study in history was done in Wisconsin. They looked at 900,000 children, and they were looking for autism. They knew what it looked like, and they were very, very precise about it, and they found an incident rate of 0.7, in other words, less than 1 per every 10,000 children. Today, our most recent numbers are 1 in every 31 kids. It's probably actually much worse than that.
His approach is not without its detractors. 9 former heads of the CDC wrote an op-ed for the New York Times asserting that Kennedy is endangering every American's health.
Now, of course, the CDC has not a lot of credibility with many Americans, given its levels of failure during the COVID pandemic. Actually, before we get into that, maybe let's talk about the autism of it all for a second. I don't know that it's disagreement necessarily, but when he says that it's so much higher and that thus we must be looking for some very mysterious culprit, and I think in his mind it's vaccination, or it's like chemicals in the water, it's some obvious pharmacological kind of, almost in some way a lefty scare phenomenon, corporate malfeasance something. Don't we overdiagnose it also now? Aren't we kind of just saying that everyone with a weird personality is on the spectrum, right, is a very common way of describing people? I'm not so sure that that's not going to explain a tremendous amount of the difference. He's saying they were very rigorous when they did it 20 or 30 years ago. I don't think we're rigorous about it at all. I'm not saying that's the only thing going on, but I have to imagine that's part of the conversation.
Yeah, I think it's probably a combination of both of those things. And I wrote about this in my Unfit to Print newsletter about a similar but separate problem, which is the rise of mental illness in adolescents in America.
Yeah.
Yes, part of it is social media and loneliness and lack of community ties and all of these things that do potentially lead to people feeling depressed or anxious.
Sure.
But there's also an over-medicalization of tough feelings or big feelings. So when we say, rates of depression have skyrocketed in young people, some of that is because there's overdiagnoses happening, which are pushed by big pharma and medical associations. So I'm sure there's some of that happening with the autism epidemic too. But I do think going from 0.7 in every 10,000 to 1 in every 30 suggests that maybe there's something else going on too.
When you don't have to do backbreaking farm labor from an early age or die of smallpox, you have time to become sad or autistic or whatever. There is part of that going on.
I think so.
Okay, on to the bigger questions or structural questions. I think it's hard because I never want to just disagree with what experts are saying just because they're experts. Then it's just knee-jerk contrarianism. But also, the New York Times clearly thinks, or the experts, the mainstream people, clearly think they're being persuasive when they're saying, but look how many experts disagree with what he's doing. Surely you must think it's bad. So you can obviously go to either extreme. I think the vaccine stuff, I said this on the recent roundtable today, I said it on Rising. Where I'm aligned with RFK Jr. is really not so much on this topic as it was in the other failures of the CDC with them keeping schools so long. That's directly having to do with their intervention, the guidance they gave, masking, social distancing, et cetera. I don't, and also it's just about the COVID. Now, I agree with RFK Jr. on the COVID vaccine that its performance was certainly overhyped, and what it was expected to do to prevent the pandemic, that did not pan out. That's an expert failing of them saying it was going to do one thing and it not being successful on that front. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag. You know, I don't want to make it harder to get the measles vaccine. Obviously, I think most of these vaccines are very effective and should be given to children. I want as much freedom involved as possible. I don't want to force basically anyone to get anything they don't want. You have to make some accommodations for, you know, public facilities, that sort of thing. So I don't know if he's going too far in that. He very well might be, but there's a lot of justifiable distrust toward the CDC.
Definitely, and I think there's also a lot of mainstream media or corporate media conflation of legitimate questions about vaccines with just a catch-all vaccine denier or vaccine skeptic label. Because as I was reading into some of the reasons why the CDC director was fired, I realized, well, actually, most of those reasons are things that I agree with, which was continuing to have the COVID-19 vaccine on the childhood vaccine schedule, for example, or requiring all pregnant women to get, or all babies born, rather, the hepatitis B vaccine. And I mean, for people who don't understand what the debate over that is, the idea is that if the mother has Hep B, she could pass it down to her child, and so all children need to be vaccinated. But Hep B has very
to be in a risky, unsafe.
It has lifestyle behaviors associated with it that are high-risk lifestyles. So they used to only give the Hep B vaccine to children who were born of mothers who were addicts or engaged in prostitution or otherwise promiscuous behavior. And now they basically give it to everyone because they thought it was too stigmatizing to just give it to mothers who were engaged in these high-risk lifestyles.
Is there a fear that people won't be? I have no view on this whatsoever. I have just recently learned about the debate about this, but is the fear that people will not be honest, and that's why they just have to give it to everyone? Or
I mean, I'm sure that's part of it, but I mean, at the same time, like, is it really good public policy to mandate something because a small percentage are not going to be honest with their doctors?
And the mandating is the issue, and this comes up with the COVID vaccine for otherwise healthy young people and adult people, because I don't really want to make it more difficult to get any kind of medical procedure that you want to get as long as it's voluntary. But of course, this becomes difficult because who's paying for it? It's subsidized.
Right.
And if it's on the vaccine, it's on the recommendation list, then it's going to be paid for and be required.
And also, can your kid go to public school if they don't get XYZ vaccine?
Because the public school policy will be everything on the child vaccination has to be done. I really wish, I think it would be better if there was a category for drugs, pharmaceuticals, vaccine shots, a different category where it's like, you can get this, this is perfectly available, but it's not required and it's not paid for by the government. But we're not stopping you. And I think that would be a good place for this vaccine, the COVID vaccine, to occupy, because I think its detractors overstate its risks, though certainly its backers have dramatically overstated its benefit for otherwise healthy people. And like, that was the complaint. I read Bernie Sanders' op-ed in the Times as well. He wrote one about objecting to RFK Jr. must resign. And that was the issue. And I'm like, but the expert consensus doesn't even hold that you need to get it if you're anymore, if you're an otherwise healthy person. Now, at the same time, RFK Jr. has really pushed the autism vaccine. This has been like his personal crusade now for decades and decades and decades and decades. And if it's really just he's twisting all their arms at the CDC to come up for some justification with this thing, he fervently believes, and that, I don't have anything against the guy, but I believe no evidence in the countervailing direction would ever convince him he was wrong with it. He's just too bought into this idea. And if he's really just getting rid of everyone because they don't agree with him on that, I think that would be bad. He did obviously pick this woman, Susan Monterez, just recently. And so they have to vet better. They can't go, they can't go, oh my God, this isn't like a deep state person they've had to get rid of. This is who they picked.
And there were people in the MAHA movement who were apparently skeptical of her and warned RFK Jr., and then he chose her anyway. So I don't know, maybe he needs to listen to some of the grassroots people more. But one of the other problems with the childhood vaccine schedule is even on the ones that you can opt out of, a lot of moms tell me this, they go in and they get basically guilt tripped by their doctors, like, your baby's gonna die if you don't do this. I actually remember I went to my primary care doctor a couple of years ago, and was kind of just doing like a normal checkup because, I want to start a family soon with my husband, and I wanted to make sure I was healthy and everything. And the doctor told me, well, if you're out of date on your tetanus shot. If you get pregnant, you're going to have to get a tetanus shot. So we can either do it now or we can do it when you get pregnant. And I thought, well, gosh, I'd rather do it now when I am not growing a baby inside me than having the baby. And I later found out that it's actually not a requirement at all. And also it's kind of weird. Like, is my baby gonna step on a rusty nail? Probably not. Like the risk factor for tetanus for a baby is very, very low. And so it was just a strange experience that made me think about a lot of the moms I've talked to over the years who have had sort of similar stories about going through the medical establishment and feeling like it's so hard to find medical professionals who don't really push it on you and are willing to listen to people who have, rightful concerns about the childhood vaccine schedule. And I think that's a huge part of why the MAHA movement has gotten so popular.
Well, I definitely think it's better to ask these questions of your doctor. Find a doctor you like. Ask these questions of your doctor because every person is different, and your doctor only knows you. So I'd much rather have people than the extremes either way. If people just totally independently basing everything on like what they Google or what politicians they like, or just defaulting to whatever the head of the CDC says, because they're considering things that neither of them know you. Talk to someone who knows you and get their advice and proceed that way is generally a better way.
Yeah, and one final point on this, you mentioned the study that they're doing with autism and how it's going to be conducted. I hope that it's done similarly to the study they did on the gender affirming care for young people, because they actually had quite a few liberal scientists on that panel, and they didn't go into it seeking a certain conclusion, right? They actually reviewed all of the available evidence and put out this report that was anonymized that said they didn't find any evidence or any strong evidence, compelling evidence.
Which is why it's been such a powerful piece of evidence for people who want to be slow about how aggressively we recommend those
one of
things.
the authors actually came out and wrote a piece for the Washington Post saying, the left has been attacking this report. I was one of the people who wrote it, and I consider myself a liberal. So it would be nice if they do the same thing, similar review for the autism report, so that its findings are more credible and not overtly politicized right off the bat.
That's a great point. I really agree with that. We'll have more free media right after this. Stay tuned.